Good morning, and welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Press, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We're going to return now where we left off, backing up just a paragraph for continuity purposes. Reading a discussion of the book, The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. We're talking about how Rome, the Vatican, has gained control of the education system in this country, and this is important for American citizens to understand. The reason we are not generally aware of Protestant history or Roman Catholic history or Jesuit history or the New World Order as opposed to the Old World Order is simply because they've removed all this information from the schools, so that we can't make intelligent decisions. And it's important for us to understand why they are teaching globalism in the schools. Globalism, a global community, which naturally requires a global sovereign to be the authority over it. This is the Tower of Babel being re-erected right before our very eyes. This is the creation of a modern version of Nimrod. And if this is going to be opposed, it has to be done intelligently. It has to be done with knowledge of the Scripture and the knowledge of history. Now, the churches are responsible to make sure we're all knowledgeable in the Scriptures, and I've already shown here on Inquisition Update that the churches are not teaching the Scriptures. They're teaching falsehood. They're teaching futurism instead of historicism. And this is all helpful to the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order and the creation of a one-world government, a one-world religion, and a one-world economic system. And none of it could have happened unless the Roman Catholic Church, through the Jesuits, got control of education. Now, it says, not very long ago, reading the first full paragraph, very last few lines on page 396, if you're following along. R.W. Thompson says, not very long ago, Pope Leo XIII sent to the United States an official representative in the person of Monsignor Satolli. Monsignor Satolli, S-A-T-O-L-L-I, nominally Archbishop of Lepanto in Greece. He is called a delegate, but in view of the fact that he fully represents the Pope as his other self, and that his powers are so complete and plenary that no appeal can be taken from his decisions, it is more appropriate to call him a vice-pope. He is said to be a learned and discreet man, and it is doubtless true that he deserves all the compliments otherwise bestowed upon him. He had not, however, been long in this country before he found that there were divisions of sentiment among the Roman Catholics with reference to our common schools, some sending their children to them, notwithstanding the instructions of their priest not to do so, and others refusing because they considered our schools to be godless, that is, infidel. This devolved upon him the duty and necessity of deciding a question which had hitherto baffled the most ingenious minds, a question made more difficult by the fact that it involved either the approval or disapproval of well-established and popular measures of public polity. His decision is entitled to consideration and should be closely scrutinized, inasmuch as it is claimed for it that it is the final solution of a great and puzzling problem. The statement of it, which follows, is taken substantially from that made by himself to the archbishops at a meeting held by them in New York State. Now, this is where we pick up where we left off yesterday. It says, he, that is Monsignor Satolli, claims for the Roman Catholic Church both the duty and the divine right of teaching religion to all nations and of instructing the young. That is, she holds for herself the right of teaching the truths of faith and law of morals in order to bring up youth in the habits of the Christian life, Nevertheless, there is no repugnance in their learning the first elements or the higher branches of the arts and natural sciences in public schools controlled by the state. Now, these are all quotes of Monsignor Satoli. There's nothing wrong with Roman Catholics learning reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? It says, and other, sciences that are given in the public schools that are controlled by the state, which protects them in their persons and property. In other words, practical knowledge. It's fine for Roman Catholics to go to the public schools and sit in these classes. It says, but, he continues, the Catholic Church shrinks from those features of public schools which are opposed to the truth of Christianity and to morality. Wherefore he insists that every effort shall be made, both by the bishops and others. So here's who's influencing the schools. Listen carefully. He says, wherefore he insists that every effort be made, both by the bishops, that's by the Roman Catholic bishops, and others who go unnamed, and I would assume that would be whoever the bishop appoints, like members on your school board. Never, ever, ever let a Roman Catholic bishop or a Roman Catholic priest advise a school board or elect its officials. He says, wherefore he insists that every effort should be made, both by the Roman Catholic bishops and others, to remove these objectionable features. In other words, those objectionable features in our history class that would have made sense out of history. Instead of being just a disconnected list of dates and names and places and events, there would be continuity in history. What has been removed from the history is what binds history, as every brick binds itself to a wall. If you remove some of the bricks, the wall simply won't hold up the building. And that's what they've done. They've removed vital information from history that helps us make sense of all of it. And when you plug that information back into history, then the Bible makes sense, because it too is a history book, the most reliable history book ever written. But the Vatican wants these quote-unquote objectionable features of the public schools removed. They don't want a teacher, a civics or a politic teacher teaching American politics or American history or world history or social studies or any of those classes mentioning the Crusades and the Inquisitions and why and against whom those Crusades and Inquisitions were leveled. They don't want anything in the public schools to educate people about the lives of people like Pope Innocent III, Pope Alexander VI. The list is long. As a matter of fact, we read most of the history of the popes written by a Jesuit priest here on Inquisition Update. We read the Dark Side of the Vicars of Christ, The Dark Side of the Papacy by Peter de Rosa. Well, they don't want that book on the public school shelves. They don't want students reading that. It helps make sense of history, to realize that history is a continuation of the past, and the present is a result of that history. We begin to see rhyme and reason to history and the direction that the future will certainly take us. And what we've discovered here at Inquisition Update is that the New World Order is simply a restoration of the Old World Order, the Dark Ages when the Pope ruled supreme over the kings of the earth and the people were left in servitude, superstition, and ignorance. And they were enslaved to serve a man and not God. He says everywhere, he says, wherefore he insists that every effort should be made, both by the bishops and others, to remove these objectionable features from the school. There's certain things that the bishop of the Roman Catholic Church doesn't want the students in the public schools to learn. Imagine that. Now, he recommends that the bishops and the civil authorities, here you go, the bishops represent the church, and the civil authorities represent the state. We're talking about a union of church and state here. That's the direction Rome always goes. And he recommends that the bishops and the civil authorities shall agree, quote, to conduct the schools with mutual attention and due consideration for their respective rights, unquote. That is, that the schools shall be under their joint control. In other words, the public schools cannot exist without the influence of the bishop. I suggest that is also true in the court systems. And I can name you one case where it is almost a certainty that a Roman Catholic bishop determined the verdict in a case, irrespective of justice. And that is in the case of Tony Alamo Christian Ministries. Now, he says that is that the schools shall be under joint control, so that teachers for the secular branches shall be, quote, inhibited from offending Roman Catholic religion and morality, unquote, and the Roman Catholic Church be permitted to shed her light by teaching the children catechism in order to remove danger to their faith and morals from any quarter whatsoever. That's right. If given the choice, if given an opportunity, the bishops of the Roman Catholic Church would insist that the catechism be taught in the state schools, that every student be made Catholic. I mean, after all, the Roman Catholic Church claims divine right and responsibility for the education of all youth. And how do they educate? Partly through the catechism, which teaches that the Pope, the man occupying that chair in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, is the representative of Jesus Christ on earth, and he has all power on heaven and earth. And one of his principal jobs is to educate youth and to control governments, to seat kings and to remove kings, to be worshipped as a god. He says that the schools should be inhibited from offending Catholic religion and morality, and that the church be permitted to shed her light by teaching the children catechism in order to remove danger to their faith and morals from any quarter whatsoever. Now, he says this was adroit, but not satisfactory. Although it was understood that Monsignor Satoli's decisions were to be final, this created such disaffection that it was found necessary to submit the matter to the Pope, against whose opinion, when officially promulgated, there could be no protest. Pope Leo XIII deliberated upon the matter for some time and received from the American prelates arguments upon both sides. He, however, reached a conclusion which he communicated to Cardinal Gibbons in an encyclical letter dated the 31st of May, 1893, which constitutes one of the latest papal utterances. Besides its numerous recitals, some of which do not bear directly upon the subject, he distinctly approves the decision of Monsignor Satoli, because it had been approved and recommended to him by the archbishops at their meeting in New York. He expresses great admiration for the people of the United States, especially the Roman Catholic portion of them, and says that he had sent Monsignor Satoli here in order that his, quote, presence might be made, as it were, perpetual among the faithful by the permanent establishment of an apostolic delegation in Washington, unquote. So Satoli's visit to the United States was to be permanent, and he was to represent the Pope, a permanent papal representative in the United States, to oversee the public school system and everything else in this country and report directly to the Pope, and then so the Pope could give direct instruction to the Roman Catholics in this country through this apostolic delegation in Washington, D.C. You see, in the United States of America, we have two nations growing up side by side. Those who hold the Constitution of the United States as the basis of law, and those who hold up Roman Catholic canon law as the basis of law, and the Pope, the authority of the Pope. Two nations side by side. This country is not united. They call it the United States, but it was purposely divided by the Roman Catholic Church. It says this he probably considers a precautionary step, for as Monsignor Sotoli cannot have any official relations with our government, at least not legally, Italy being represented by a minister appointed by the king, he can remain as a permanent establishment. That is, the Pope can remain, through Monsignor Sotoli, a permanent establishment at the capital of the nation, so that he may not only watch the course of events, but be in readiness to become an apostolic minister plenipotentiary whensoever, by the aid of the faithful outside of Italy, he shall be able to snatch the crown of the head upon which the Italian people have placed it and put it upon his own. So this apostolic delegate, Monsignor Sotoli, and by the way, I'm still hearing some delayed audio coming in from the station. There's got to be an open mic somewhere. Anyway, that this delegate, Monsignor Sotoli, is to be the very presence of the Pope in the United States, a permanent papal installation in this country, and that it may, at any instance, by the decree of the Pope, become a minister plenipotentiary. In other words, to take action and to use the United States or to organize an international religio-political party to overthrow the legitimate government of Italy and to reinstate the papacy as the King of Kings in Italy, where the people had thrown off the papal tyranny and elected and appointed their own government and their own constitution. See, this is using the United States of America through the influence of a papal nuncio in this country, through the influence of Roman Catholics in this country, to use the resources of this entire nation to overthrow a legitimate government. I call them, just for simplicity, papal proxy wars. To make the United States, the nation of the United States, a crusader for the Pope. And that's, in fact, what it would be if it used its resources, its taxpayer-funded resources, to mount a military campaign against Victor Emmanuel and the Republic of the Italian people, to overthrow it and to put Pope Leo XIII back in governing control. And that's just one of the main missions of sending this Monsignor Sotoli to the United States, to get control of the educational system and to get control of the entire country eventually. That's the New World Order. It's a mirror image of the old. You can't tell them apart. Remind you of any Bible scriptures? And they made an image unto the beast. That's what the United States is, an image of the beast. The New World Order is simply an image made in the likeness of the Old World Order. The instrumentality through which the Pope is re-erecting this Old World Order is through the United States. And the evidence of it is right here before us. He says the approval of Monsignor Sotoli's decision, however, we're getting back into the discussion about the school system, gets very confusing here. He says the approval of Monsignor Sotoli's decision, however, has this important condition attached to it by Pope Leo XIII, quote, that Catholic schools are to be most sedulously promoted, and that it is to to be left to the judgment of the conscience of the ordinary to decide, that ordinary being a representative of the papacy in each Roman Catholic Church, or diocese, as it were, to decide, according to the circumstances, when it is lawful and when unlawful for Roman Catholic children to attend public schools, unquote. This is a most significant condition. In the first place, it takes away from the parents, the Roman Catholic parents, the right to direct the education of their own children, and places it in the hands of the ordinary, who officially represents the papal power. In the second place, it leaves the papal condemnation and censure still resting upon our system of common schools, and only removes it here and there from such local and particular schools as the ordinaries of the Church, that is, the ordinaries of the Roman Catholic Church, may find acceptable to them. And in the third place, it is a positive and unqualified affirmance of what multitudes of priests have said, that our schools are quote-unquote godless, and that in order to counteract their irreligious influences, quote, Catholic schools, Roman Catholic schools, are to be the most sedulously promoted, unquote. That's how the parochial school system got its start here in the United States of America. It was to help educate young people for the eventual overthrow of our government and the erection of the papacy as a global monarch. And that's why they teach globalism even in the public schools. We'll be right back after these messages.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Have you seen the Left Behind movies? Have you read the Left Behind fictional book series? Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. Because they see the world stage shaping to fulfill what they have been led to believe is sound biblical interpretation, a left behind rapture scenario, this false view of prophecy is reinforced in the mind, not only of its adherents, but also includes those who have been merely exposed to the specific media. Is it possible that false prophecy can be fulfilled? The rapture theories have always been in dispute. Pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib disputes have risen up in exclusively evangelical circles of recent history, so that when true believers don't suddenly disappear, this element will easily go by the wayside when all see a new Jewish temple begin to be built. Will this be part of the great delusion that will come upon the whole earth? It seems that this great prophetic delusion has already overcome practically the entire American evangelical and Christian world. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. To learn more, visit crosstheborder.org. That's CROSS, crosstheborder.org.
Record budget deficits, bankruptcies galore, and the U.S. dollar is at an all-time low. With today's gloomy economic outlook, safe investments are often hard to find. For over a decade, Melody Cedarstrom at Discount Gold and Silver Trading Company has been helping people secure their future by investing in the precious metals. Melody has the honesty, integrity, and experience that is often lacking in the precious metals business. Let her put it to work for you. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 800-375-4188. That's 800-375-4188.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. Remember, Inquisition Update is sponsored by First Amendment Radio, so if you wish to support Inquisition Update, please support FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Now, according to the Pope, the bishops are to help control or help manage. The Roman Catholic bishops are supposed to have joint control with the state in the public schools, so that Roman Catholics are not offended in their religion. There's certain things they don't want discussed in the public schools. They don't want little Protestant kids in the schools to know the history of Protestantism, nor to know the history of Roman Catholicism, so that they can make sense out of history, because the Vatican has a strange future planned. And that strange future cannot succeed if the knowledge of Protestantism and Roman Catholic history is widely known. They've got a secret, and they want to keep it a secret. And ignorance is the only way to achieve their goals. So, the Roman Catholic priests are supposed to have joint control of the public school system to keep that secret. And then also, Roman Catholic schools, parochial schools, are to be sedulously promoted, vigorously promoted. Two sources of education in this country, one public and one private. A private school system for little Roman Catholic kids, and a very much controlled public school system for everybody else, controlled by the Roman Catholic Church. To me, it leaves very little room for doubt that it's all a Roman Catholic agenda, and that's exactly what it is. Now, after Monsignor Satoli weighed in and was working on this dissension, even among Roman Catholics who saw nothing wrong with the public schools, nor sending their children to public schools, he continues, he says, but there is another condition attached by Pope Leo XIII, which is equally significant as that just named. It is due to him that this should be stated in his own words. He says this, quote, "As we have already declared in our letter of the 23rd of May of last year to our venerable brethren, the Archbishop and Bishop of the province of New York, we say again, as far as need be, declare that the decrees which the Baltimore councils agreeably to the directions of the Holy See, have enacted concerning parochial schools and whatever else has been prescribed by the Roman pontiffs, whether directly or through the sacred congregations concerning the same matter, are to be steadfastly observed. Okay, so the position that the church is supposed to take with regard to public schools is, having considered what Monsignor Satoli says, what Pope Leo XIII says, but it also must include the decrees of the Baltimore councils and of all the preceding pontiffs. All right? That's a vast amount of information to cover. And it says, whatsoever powers the Pope may have intended to confer upon Monsignor Satoli, whether those of a vice-pope or a mere legate, it is certain that he did not intend to lessen his own, right? The Vicar of Christ, he's not going to lessen his own authority here. He says these are plenary, and therefore his pontifical decisions are absolutely binding because he is infallible. In order, therefore, to ascertain the relation to be hereafter borne to our common school system by the Roman Catholics of the United States, we are required to look to the decision of Monsignor Satoli as qualified by the conditions attached to it by Pope Leo XIII. Taking the whole together, it amounts to this: that God has specially appointed the Roman Catholic Church the educator of the young. That where another system of education is set up, like our public school system, against that prescribed by the Church, it is necessarily sinful and heretical, and may be rightfully overthrown and destroyed, or highly regulated by the bishops, I will add. That the Church system of education requires that the pupils shall be taught religion, and first and always that there is no other true religion besides that which the Roman Catholic Church teaches. That notwithstanding this, a Roman Catholic child may, as a matter of either necessity or expediency, be sent to the public schools of the states, merely to learn, quote, the first elements, reading, writing, and ciphering, and also the higher branches of the arts and natural sciences, mathematics, chemistry, and engineering, etc. That the Roman Catholic Church shrinks from the idea that the intermediate branches should be taught to children for fear they should discover that the Protestant nations are more prosperous and happy than the Roman Catholic nations of the world. That when Roman Catholic children are sent to the public schools, efforts shall be made to procure the appointment of Roman Catholic teachers to instruct them in their religious obligations and duties, and especially to the effect that Protestantism is heresy and diversities of religious belief offensive to God, and consequently has his divine curse resting upon it. That the objectionable features of our public school system must be removed by plottings within the schools necessary to that end, so that instead of being free, they shall be made Roman Catholic Church schools. That so long as the children are not taught the catechism, they will remain godless and heretical schools. And that if in any of the schools the children shall be taught that the state ought to continue separated from the church, or that differences of religious belief should be tolerated, or that our Protestant institutions must be preserved as they are, all or either of these things must be considered as offending the Catholic religion and morality. Thus far, Monsignor Satoli. But the Pope adds the peremptory injunction that Roman Catholic schools must be most sedulously promoted. That is, they must be set up in rivalry to our common school system, so that the antidote may root out the bane, that the ordinary, and not the parents, shall decide what children shall be permitted to shall decide what children shall be permitted to enter the schools, and that in interpreting the decision of Monsignor Satoli, it must be done in accordance with the decrees of the Baltimore councils and the rules, quote, prescribed by the Roman pontiffs, unquote. R.W. Thompson says this settles nothing and leaves the whole question ambiguous. It is Jesuitical because it, quote, palters with us in a double sense, unquote, by keeping the, quote, word of promise in our ear while breaking it to our hopes. In reference to the Baltimore councils as their guide, the faithful find themselves instructed to omit nothing within their power to pull down the common schools and build up the Roman Catholic Church schools in their place, for the reason that the former are irreligious and the latter alone have the divine approval. And they find also that they are instructed by the Second Council of Baltimore that their children are to be taught as an essential part of their religion that the state is not independent of the church, and that, quote, all power is of God, unquote, so that whatsoever the state prescribes not obedient to the law of God is not binding upon the citizen, and that the Roman Catholic has such a guide in the church that if the state shall require of him anything inhibited by the church, he must obey the latter and not the former. But independently of this, the Pope commands that these same faithful shall interpret the decision of Monsignor Satoli in the light of, quote, whatsoever else has been prescribed by the Roman pontiffs, unquote. This, according to R.W. Thompson, is indefinite. There have been over 250 popes. Many of these have been good and some bad, but these latter forfeit none of their infallible ecclesiastical authority by being bad. To whom among all these shall the inquirer defer when he investigates what they have commanded with reference to education? Many of them have asserted ex cathedra, that is, from the throne, with the aura of papal infallibility surrounding it, that the exclusive right to educate the young has been divinely conferred upon the Roman Catholic Church, and that Pope Leo XIII, in his recent letter to the American Cardinal, makes that assertion unequivocally. It is not believed that any pope ever asserted the contrary. Therefore, this general and sweeping qualification by Monsignor Satoli's decision either destroys its effect absolutely or leaves it to uncertain rules of interpretation. Thus viewed, it leaves the school question just as it stood before Monsignor Satoli came to this country. Let me tell you something. Rome has an agenda she doesn't even want Roman Catholic children to understand. I don't think this confusion is a result of too many chiefs and not enough Indians, as it appears to be in this reading. I think confusion defines the Roman Catholic Church, just like the prototype she is of the Babylonian archetype, the Tower of Babel. Confusion. But Rome has an agenda, and she leaves all avenues open for her advancement and ultimate victory over the rest of the human race. Education is one of the primary means by which Rome's goals are achieved. And confusion, to make sure nobody catches on to what the Vatican is up to, is critical to her success. R.W. Thompson continues, he says, but Monsignor Satoli himself provides for two school systems, which as he regards them are the rivals of each other, because he, like Leo XIII, considers the Roman Catholic Church as having had divinely conferred upon it the right of education and training of youth. But Pope Leo XIII makes this idea of more prominence when he commands, quote, that Catholic schools are to be most sedulously promoted, unquote. It all therefore amounts to this, that wheresoever there is a Roman Catholic who cannot avoid it, he may send his children to the common schools for the sole purpose of having them taught the first elements and the higher branches of the arts and the natural sciences. But in all other intermediate departments of education, they must be under the exclusive charge of those appointed by the Roman Catholic Church to be their instructors in religion. Hence, not only is there to be continued rivalry between the schools, but between the systems as well. In the common schools, the pupils are taught that our popular form of government is calculated to promote and preserve the general welfare, that our fathers acted wisely and well when they separated church and state, that laws which require universal conformity to any particular form of religious faith are not only unwise, but violative of the natural right, that those people who govern themselves by the laws of their own making are happier and more prosperous than those who suffer themselves to be governed by monarchs and princes, and I will add, popes, and that the regulation of public affairs by constitutional governments is better for society than where they are regulated at the will of any one man. In the papal schools, perhaps within a stone's throw of the common schools, the pupils are taught that each one of these propositions is heresy, and that both those who teach and those who accept them as true are under divine condemnation. In the common schools, the teacher enforces what he says by the example of the United States, gives instruction in our revolutionary history, explains the provisions of our national and our state constitutions, which make the people the only source of public law, and stimulates the patriotism of his pupils by urging them the necessity of perpetuating our institutions in their present form for the benefit of their posterity. But in the papal school system, the teacher is required, when he denounces all these provisions of our institutions as heresy, to enforce what he says by instructing his pupils that innumerable, infallible popes have so declared it, and that they will offend God if they do not accept what they have announced as absolutely true, and in order that they may not be suspected of error by their youthful pupils, they need go no further back among the popes than Pope Pius IX and his Syllabus of Error of 1864, wherein, after pointing out 79 modern errors which he condemned, including public schools, where teaching is, quote, freed from all ecclesiastical authority, unquote, he adds still another by declaring that it is impossible that the Roman pontiff can and ought to reconcile himself and agree with progress, liberalism, and civilization as lately introduced. In other words, the Pope doesn't have to go along with the new Protestant system that the world has adopted in favor of Protestantism and rejecting the old world order. He says, or, if it shall be found necessary to go further back than Pope Pius IX, he need but refer to the celebrated encyclical of his immediate predecessor, Pope Gregory XVI, issued July 15, 1832, wherein he declared that those who maintain that God could be rightly served by men of different faiths, different religious faiths, quote, will perish eternally without any doubt, unquote, if they do not repent and, quote, hold to the Catholic faith, unquote. That it is false and absurd to pretend that liberty of conscience should be established and guaranteed to each man. That the liberty of the press is the most fatal liberty and execrable liberty for which there can never be sufficient horror. That writings which are destructive of the fidelity and submission due to princes that is, the monarchical system, are to be condemned because they enkindle, quote, the firebrands of sedition, that divine and human rights then rise in condemnation against those who, by the blackest machinations of revolt and sedition, endeavor to destroy the fidelity due to these monarchical princes and to hurl them from their thrones. That constant submission to princes necessarily has its source in the holiest principles of the, and I nearly choked to read the word, Christian religion. That they are criminal in the sight of God who demand the separation of church and state and the rupture of concord between the priesthood and the empire, that is, the state, and that the union of church and state is feared and opposed by the advocates of liberty because, quote, it has always been so salutary and so happy for church and state, unquote. You see how diametrically opposed the two systems are? One is going to win out, and one is going to lose. And it appears, unless God's people wake up, unless true Americans wake up, that Rome has won, and this New World Order is a done deal. He says, if, however, the pupils in these papal schools should indicate the suspicion that these official proclamations of doctrine by Pope Pius IX and Leo XIII had not the sanction of earlier popes, their teachers, especially if Jesuits, will take delight in instructing them that these two last popes at the foot of the list are following strictly in the footsteps of some of the most conspicuous of their predecessors. And then they will dwell eloquently upon the magnificent pontificates of Antichrist Pope Gregory VII, Alexander III, Innocent III, Boniface VIII, and others equally ambitious, but of less strength of will. The task will be an easy one to explain the history of these great popes and the political religious principles they succeeded in grafting upon the dogmas of the Roman Catholic Church. They will instruct them how Gregory VII plucked the crowns from the heads of disobedient kings, released their subjects from their allegiance, and placed other and obedient kings in their places. How he claimed the right as Pope to dispose of kingdoms, because, quote, the spiritual is above the temporal power, unquote, to so great an extent that all the people, quote, should murder their princes, their fathers, and their children if he commands it, unquote. And how he made monarchs, princes, and peoples tremble before him as if he, by virtue alone of his pontifical power, were the master of the world. And they will show them how Alexander III released the German people from their allegiance to their king Frederick Barbarossa and compelled that proud emperor to kiss his foot, to lead his horse by the bridle, and submit to having the papal heel planted upon his neck. And how Pope Innocent III declared by solemn pontifical decree that the English Magna Carta was null and void because it laid the foundation of popular liberty and excommunicated all who were concerned in the patriotic work of obtaining it, and how Boniface VIII decreed in his bull, Clericus Laicus, that lay governments, quote, have no power over the persons or the property of ecclesiastics, and that those who shall impose tithes, taxes, and burdens upon them without the authority of the Pope shall incur excommunication, and how he also decreed by his bull Unum Sanctum that the Church, that is, the Pope, holds in her hands both the spiritual and temporal swords, with the power to compel the latter to be used for and in the interest of the former. That the temporal sword is therefore subject to the spiritual power, and that it is an article of necessary faith that every human being be subject to the Roman Pontiff. This is history, folks. This is the history that the Roman Catholic Church does not want in the public school system. And guess what? It's not in the public school system. And this history that we're reading today would make all the difference in the minds of the Americans when they look at what is happening in this country. They would find that current events are simply the result of history, and that there's continuity. We can see the direction of the Roman Catholic Church throughout history and where it is taking us by compulsion. If this history were taught in the schools and in the churches, the New World Order would come crumbling around the Pope's mitre. They've controlled the school system. They've controlled the churches. They've returned us to the days of the Middle Ages, where ignorance was relied upon for this system to continue. They have indeed restored the Dark Ages to this country. And now the boot heel of papal monarchism is going to be felt on the necks of Bible-believing Protestants in this country. An inquisition will result. That's why this program's called Inquisition Update. Run out of time for today. We'll continue with the reading of the book Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson on the program tomorrow. Thanks for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.